Dave Williams presents Conversations.buzz.
DEBORAH Parenti, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Dave.
And congratulations on your recent induction into the Radio Hall of Fame. That is so exciting.
Thank you. It was definitely special.
How'd the evening go for you? Tell us about it.
I've kind of defined it by one word. It was magical.
Yeah.
It was nerve-wracking because there's all these wonderful people there, many already in the Hall of Fame, many who either will be or certainly belong in the Hall of Fame. And I think, as with a lot of others, you're sitting there going, how did I get here?
Yeah.
And probably a whole lot of other people are wondering, how'd she get here?
No, I doubt that.
But it was, it truly was. It was a lovely evening. You don't realize how special it's going to be until you're actually in the middle of it. I mean, I think the nerves overcome everything else, the anticipation and that sort of stuff. But then you get up there and you see these wonderful people, and you know that you're in an industry that, for all of our criticisms today, loves its people, and its people love it. But we love what we do. You're in a room filled with people who just love that theater of the mind.
There's absolutely no doubt about that. That's why I started this particular specialty branch of my little podcast, calling it Radio Masters, because there are so many people on Facebook and other social media that worked in radio at one time or another and can't get over it. They can't get it out of their systems, and they've started up all these pages and so forth. And I've seen the same thing for TV industry people. And so I thought, yeah, let's get the thoughts and philosophies and the ideas of some of you who really truly reached the top of your game. Now, I've got to tell you that you're a little bit outside of my what do they call it? When you're my hitting zone or whatever it is, because I spent 54 years in radio, but it was all, until just recently, I retired, it was all programming and production related. I never had anything to do with the business side, except, answering questions and helping out when I was requested to. But I don't know anything about it. After 50 years, I don't know anything about how sales departments work. I don't know anything about general management or the overall, especially now, the overall executive offices of big corporations and all of that. So I'm going to ask you to kind of guide the conversation in the direction we should be going, because I don't want to just sit here and ask you a lot of stupid questions about programming. So,
well, the closest thing that I was into programming, I was the promotion director.
Yeah.
So I worked with the programming department a great deal when I first started in the industry. That was always one of my favorite sides of the business, working with program directors and the creative side, the bringing something to life, having a guy come in or a gal come in and say, I need X amount of dollars for this. Well, tell me about that. Really? You need that much, huh? Well, if you had twice that much, what could we do? And they always stand back and go, wow.
Yeah.
So I was also a business manager. Actually, I spent my least amount of time probably in sales on the street.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because you have risen to the top every place you've worked and done it so quickly. And as I understand your background, your management positions in first Dayton and then Louisville and then Philadelphia, and then now you're back to Dayton and you're running a publishing company. And it seems to me, and I know you've been in the industry for more than 30 years. That sounds like a long time, but it's a fraction of the time that it would take most people to reach a pinnacle position in any of those aspects of the media.
Well, actually, I've been with Streamline, Radio Inc. and Radio and Television Business Report now, believe it or not, for 16 years. Well, I spent more years in the industry, in the actual industry.
Uh-huh.
I've spent more time with this one company than any one single company. As we know, I think the longest tenure at a broadcasting company was 12 years. But I had, a lot of actually, I will acknowledge this, that maybe when we're talking close to around 50 years in the industry would be more like it.
Yeah.
So,
right. I believe you. Well, the question I've been asking everyone that I've talked with lately is one that I've heard discussed in radio studios and the hallways for years, and that is our industry dead? Is it dying? Is it going away as we've known it?
how many times have we heard that over the years? Now, that said, I think we have to acknowledge that the challenges today are significantly greater, or more, they have their tentacles into more areas than any other time. I mean, AI is a good example of a technology that has, in 1 year, taken off like crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking at our forecast conference last week. A year ago at Forecast, nobody was talking about AI. It was a week after Forecast that they introduced Open Chat GPT,
Yeah.
So that tells you, I mean, and all the other technology, the digital transformations and things like that. But is radio dead and dying? No, because as long as there are human beings on this earth, there's going to be a need to connect with other human beings. And it's not just over the fence. There is that one-on-one communication that radio offers that none of its other competitors can really offer in the same fashion. We are the original social media. You can tell somebody that I could call you and say there's a storm coming, and you can call somebody else and we can try to get that word around, but nobody can do that like radio. No, but particularly AM radio.
Right.
So I think that just as when television first challenged radio and radio went from network, which is actually where radio's roots are. We always say its roots are in local. No, it's not. It's a network.
Mm-hmm.
It went to local when television.
That's true.
Became popular.
Yeah.
Now it has become, and it is on the forefront of local media. But and it will morph more. And I think that there's going to be some people who are going to challenge the idea of that and fail miserably until we get to the point where powers that be recognize that its survival depends on its localism. And that means even in an era of voice tracking, somebody needs to be keeping an eye on what's going on so you can flip it live.
Right.
At a moment's notice.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. You're right. Radio is able to respond to local needs much better than any other media, any of the other medium. But we've stopped doing it. Largely, we've stopped doing it. Even the all news stations are unstaffed on weekends, or barely staffed on weekends. They can't respond to breaking news. That's important stuff. Here in Texas, we get tornado warnings. I know about that because I hear a siren going on outside my house, and I can turn on the TV. But if I turn on the radio, I'm not going to learn anything.
Well,
with a
that's
couple
where
of exceptions. Go ahead.
We're challenged, and that we're challenged to do that. We're trying to, as you well know, maintain and keep AM radio in cars. And the big argument is exactly what you just expressed, that we are local. We can deliver that information in areas of the country that don't have cell service, that for farmers who are very dependent on it, for example, as well. And they just so happen to feed the rest of us. So we ought to pay attention to what they want. But if we're talking that game to the FCC and to Congress and stating that that is our noble purpose, and we aren't delivering it.
Right.
And as I said, you have to understand, in today's economics, it's hard for stations to make, to break even, much less, particularly smaller stations, to break even, much less to make a profit. So there is some need for some trimming where we didn't used to have to do it. And there probably is some need for some voice tracking and some syndicated programming. But again, with today's technology, and we proved it during COVID, you could be sitting there monitoring your station, monitoring weather. And if something breaks, you can go on immediately. Right. Meanwhile, call the PD and say, we need to get everybody in here now.
Yeah.
There's no reason that we can't find a happy medium. Not that I don't want to see more localism period. I love hearing the guy talking on the air, the gal mentioning, I don't know, talking about what she's fixing for Thanksgiving, and Sally calls in with a recipe or something like that, particularly in your smaller communities. Right. And by the way, those stations are thriving. It's the big we allow those who control what, about maybe 10% of the signals, which would be your big corporations. That's, the rest of those stations are in the hands of smaller and independent broadcasters. But we allow those to cloud, so to speak, some of our vision, in part because they compete in some of those smaller markets, to be sure, and therefore they dictate rates, which hurt some of the smaller stations, but they don't have the connectivity. So when Main Street wants to reach people, they will go, the guy that's been at the Kiwanis Club on a regular basis, who belongs to the Chamber of Commerce and has a presence there, they're going to do business with them. And that's why your smaller stations still thrive.
But in larger markets, you're seeing far less people actually being in the studio live and on the air. And so much of it is syndication. How much of the economic pressure is due to incorporation, companies owning 300-400 radio stations and having to respond to board of directors and their investors? Pardon me?
It's the debt.
Yeah.
It's the debt they're trying to service. They bought those stations at ridiculous multiples, and they are playing to their debt service, not to an audience.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Tails wagging the dog.
It's gotten worse because interest rates have risen. So what you were paying for some of that before, you're paying more now.
How much is podcasting, or is it yet, eating into the broadcast advertising pie for radio?
I think it's still fairly minimal. Your biggest competitors for radio revenue are your unlicensed, well, podcasting is unlicensed as well, but unless it's run by a broadcaster, unlicensed and unregulated competitors, that being Pandora, Spotify, all of that, Google, Facebook, all of those that do not have to, and they compete not only for the advertising dollars, but obviously they compete for audience. And in competing for audience, they are allowed to, they have an open playing, they can do anything.
Yeah.
Broadcasters are licensed. That means they can go over the edge with their humor, or so-called humor, or whatever, their bits, whereas broadcasters can only go up to the line. You're competing in that area, not just in advertising, and that does somewhat dictate that. Of course, on the other hand, and it's been proven time and again, and it's been discussed a lot, digital metrics are not to be believed. When a radio station runs a commercial, it's invoiced, you get that bill, when it ran. And based on if it's in a rated market, you can determine how much of an audience you reached with that schedule. Try doing that with the other. And I think that we need to make that, or clarify that more among advertisers.
I was thinking about the fact that TV today may be in a tougher spot, broadcast TV, I'm saying, maybe in a tougher position than broadcast radio, in terms of the competition that it's trying to deal with streaming, and then so many different subscriber channels and packages and so forth. And we've gotten to a point, and I'm sorry, this is a personal matter for me. I live in Dallas, Texas. I can't watch a darn Cowboys football game. I can't do it. Even with the NFL Plus subscription, if the game is out of town, in a different city, I can't even watch it unless I have a subscription to the local sports. To me, TV is just a mess unless you want to watch Instagram. So it's a matter of all these technologies dogpiling in one place, and then the corporations and the debt and all that stuff. There's a lot of mess to clean up.
Yeah, there certainly is. Broadcast TV, though, and you alluded to it earlier, like radio, shares the same ability to service a local community.
Right.
You mentioned turning to television.
Right.
That those other competitors to broadcast cannot compete on that. I mean, CNN can send in a crew, but it's not the same thing as you know, I mean,
local news.
They don't know where the I don't want to say where the bodies are buried. That's kind of a bad analogy there, but they don't know where the resources are. They don't know the local community blood bank people, or you know, the city officials, and the same thing. They go in, and then if you watch them, you'll see they do their interview, and then you'll see the same one play over and over.
Right.
There's nothing new.
Right. They have their own limitations.
Right.
But
absolutely.
With local news on TV, it seems to me the big challenge there is to get your local consumer to watch it, because we're seeing the ratings continually dropping. And if you just look at social media, you see that there are so many people, and I'm not going to say most people, because I know that social media is not geared to my demographic, but there are an awful lot of people that just seem to have zero interest in what's going on in their world.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, that again, there's an education to be done there. We had at Forecast last week a very interesting gentleman, Lou Pascalis, who is with Ad Fontes, and they rate news and things like that. But he's on a campaign, and I found this really refreshing, and I wanted to present it to this conference. $2 billion of advertising revenue for local news has been lost to digital competitors. And he is on a mission to bring it. He said, advertising cannot save it by itself, local news, but you cannot, the most expensive product, particularly these days a television station has, and it's always been this way, is their news product, is their local news.
Right.
Most expensive thing to produce. If you don't have ad support, and we don't have subscriptions like, you know, some of the competitors do, you need ad support. So he has a coalition, more or less, to try to convince advertisers to invest in local journalism. And that's in addition to NAB there's a measure on in Congress to help support local journalism as well.
Mm-hmm.
These are things that need to be done, because again, you can't produce a product if you can't pay for it.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure.
And that's been, you know, we've all, and you hear this from a lot of businesses that have been economically challenged, particularly since COVID, but broadcasters are in that same kind of boat. So it gives it, you know, it's sort of a matter of, there's more to the story than than the assumptions being made.
Mm-hmm.
I think
boy, that's for sure. There's no doubt about that. We've had, like I said, I've been having these conversations with people in hallways and studios for years, and nobody can even get a good idea, regardless of which part of the building they came in from.
Yeah, right.
Nobody seems to get a clear picture of it. But let's talk about those people for a minute. Let's talk about your human resources in broadcasting, and the fact that as they say, when you got into the business, it was a career. It was a career decision, and it turned into a long-term, lifetime thing for many, many people. I'm not so sure that's the case anymore, and I'm wondering why, and wondering if we're still seeing not the quality of intellect and ability, but the quality of devotion and ambition can keep the industry healthy.
I think that part of it is self-inflicted. Part of it's generational. I mean, what you cited here, what you mentioned about lack of devotion and or trying to inspire and things like that, you hear this in every industry today.
Yeah, really.
It's not, I mean, when you get right down to it, it seems that we have perhaps it's just a different perception of what life should be all about,
Sure.
or what our priorities are.
Sure.
And I'm not going to try to judge it one way or the other as far as, you know, our younger counterparts. Well, they should be like us, you know,
Right.
they should
Right.
they should be willing to work as interns first for nothing. And, you know, everything's different, economics and everything today. It's harder. I feel for younger people trying to get into any profession.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
I
I think it's
completely agree with
difficult.
you. Yeah.
But there's also, I think, at least, and I can't say about other industries, I just know ours. You hear an awful lot of moaning and groaning and complaining by the people that have been in, or particularly are no longer in the industry. Everything's wrong. You know, the sky is falling. It almost hit me in the head. If you were an eavesdropper, a young person eavesdropping into that conversation, would you be inspired to get into it? Here's my thought. The business has changed. It's changed dramatically. I don't know if I would go into it today, or not. I don't know what I'd go into, you know, because I've lived a life now, and I have experience, certainly in broadcasting, but just life experience. So I don't know. I can't say for sure. I think I would, because I can't imagine living, breathing anything besides towers and transmitters and
Right.
all the good old stuff. But that said, the industry has changed. Hello, telecom's been almost what, 25 years now? Get over it. It's
Right.
not going, we're not going back. It's not going to go back to when you and I started in this business. If that's what you're looking for, forget about it. But you know what? If you don't like it and you're still in it and you're complaining about it, and you've been complaining about it for almost 25 years, maybe it's time for you to look for something else.
Yeah.
Because you're just bringing everybody else down.
Bringing down the room. That's what my last radio partner used to say. You just
Yeah.
bringing down the
I
room.
mean,
Just
what's the point? Who wants, you know, you come to the party,
yeah.
and instead of telling jokes or laughing or conversing with people, you're standing in the corner like this, humped over.
Right.
It's no good. Now, does that mean that there's not good constructive criticism to be had? Absolutely. But let's make sure it's, if you have a criticism, what's your answer to it? Or what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you really know what's going on enough, you know, I remember at one time, we were selling stations at one of the companies I was working for. And there's an unspoken rule of thumb, maybe it's spoken by some, but unspoken to a degree. Talent and talent contracts are assets. Management contracts are liabilities. You may want to bring in your own managers, but the talent is the one person that you can actually gauge what they're bringing to the table. You know, you're bringing in certain ratings that are bringing in an estimated certain amount of revenue. So we want to make sure that that person signed and on board before we sell this property.
Mm-hmm.
Managers, not so. Maybe some sales reps that are key with accounts, but they're not as important. Believe it or not. I mean, that's the way the industry runs. So there is something, I mean, those people on that side of the hall are considered a value proposition. The other people, not so much. Now, you get today, what's happened, unfortunately, when they're selling things today, is that you have too many bean counters involved, and they don't understand that value proposition.
Right.
They think that can, and that's, you know, but we have companies that will remain unnamed, that people work for and complain about, and will say they're ruining the industry. They're not in this industry. They've got a whole nother game plan.
Mm-hmm.
That talent, those stations are platforms for them and to disseminate their podcasts, their concerts, their whatever else they're doing.
Yeah.
They have a big, broad thing. So if you want to really be in radio, you need to bump down a little bit as far as what size company you want to work for. And by the way, that may impact what kind of money you're going to make.
Absolutely.
You know, so I mean, what I'm saying at the bottom line is that we have choices. We just have to make them, because you can't change the industry as it
Yeah.
is right now. I
Yeah.
mean, you can, you know, I wish for days when I was a kid, but those aren't going to come back.
Well, that's where we began, right? I mean, that's where our enthusiasm, our excitement about the radio
Absolutely.
started when we were young, and radio was the center of our social lives. And we took it with us everywhere, and we slept with it under the pillow, you know. But it doesn't work that way anymore.
I mean, I hate to be so, shall I say, pragmatic about it.
Yeah.
But that side of me has to be pragmatic, or else I wouldn't still try to. And I believe there's some wonderful things about this industry. There's a lot of there's still, as I said at the awards ceremony the other week, so many great people, so many people that still have some enthusiasm for it.
That's for sure.
You just have to be able to pick and choose your company, I guess, to a certain extent, and go with that. And there are things worth, I mean, AM is worth saving, but once it's saved, we have to live up to what we say we're doing. That we're not, and that's not always the case. Local journalism is certainly important, particularly in today's divisive, heated society that we live in. We need good, strong, competent, credible local journalism. We need more minorities and more and others to have an opportunity to buy some of these stations.
Yeah.
Minority tax certificate, for example. There's a lot of good things worth fighting for.
I promised you a time limit, and we're getting close to it. So let me ask you one more question, based right along the lines of what you're starting to talk to, and that is, a lot of your attention has been focused on advancement for women and minorities and young people, and that's kind of what we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes. People who aspire to join the radio industry, or maybe don't understand why they should. And maybe you need to do some recruiting, and maybe we do a little bit of encouragement and rah, rah, rah. Have the issues for minorities and women changed? Is progress being made, or are they changing? The issues changing?
I think I think the progress has been in that there's recognition of the fact that there's I hate to say a problem, but there's a challenge here to get a more diverse population into the mix, because you can't really, it's difficult to cater to, program or whatever, something you don't understand, or you have no, so it doesn't necessarily, there are, for example, Hispanic stations that are not Hispanic owned, but they have Hispanics running a lot of the properties and everything. There's an area where you've got 20% of the population approximately in this country, and yet we're talking less than single digits almost in terms of ownership. That's not, you know, that's not a good thing. I mean, particularly because there are stations out there suffering that aren't getting the right kind of attention insofar as programming and investment is concerned. Those properties, you know, how many stations we see going dark anymore because they can't make a dime. That's why consolidation was first brought to the table. That's why it got passed. Unfortunately, I think it went in directions it should not have gone in, that nobody really anticipated. I have my own opinions on that. As far as Department of Justice was concerned, they did not know what they were doing when they wrote the rules for this. They did not know what was really important in terms of ownership. I've always thought it should have been not how many stations in a market you own, but how many markets you own.
Interesting.
Because if you don't own in all the top 10, top 20 markets, you can't get national dollars to just flow to your group because they've got to buy then a couple of different groups. If I can take one group and buy the top 25 markets, boom, I'm done. If that top group has a void in 10 of those markets, I'm going to have to go elsewhere. They didn't understand what they were regulating.
Well, I can't imagine why you would say the United States government doesn't understand the twists and turns of every industry that it tends to regulate.
Right, but that's and I'm sorry, I
And
didn't mean to get off that track, but that just, you know.
And maybe there were some politicians involved in all of that, but you know.
Yep, absolutely.
Deborah, it's been a delight talking with you. It really has.
I enjoyed every minute of it. I hope that it was of some interest to your listeners.
I think it's riveting. You know, the things you said, it's like, I'd like to hear this woman talk for another half an hour, but I am going to let you go. Anyway, I can certainly understand why you've had the success you had in your career and why you are now in the Radio Hall of Fame, National Radio Hall of Fame. You've been in the Dayton, Ohio Hall of Fame for a long time.
I've also got their Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Kind
you're
of
a special
nice.
person. It's wonderful to have met you. I appreciate that.
Great meeting you two. And I don't know when this is airing, but happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we'll get it posted in a week or so.
Okay, well,
Right.
Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving then. Looking forward to the holiday.
Thank you, Deborah. You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.